Shaquille O'Neal reveals how he overcame childhood racism through the power of sports. Are you ready to hear a story about resilience, determination, and the power of sports to break down barriers? Today, you're going to discover how a young Shaquille O'Neal faced racism and prejudice in his early years, and how basketball became not just his passion, but his pathway to proving that talent and character matter more than skin color. This is a story about overcoming hatred with excellence, about turning pain into purpose, and about how sports can unite people across racial divides. If this story inspires you the way it should, please hit that like button right now, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications, because stories like this remind us that we can overcome any obstacle when we refuse to let others define our worth. Now, let's dive into this powerful journey of triumph over adversity. The humid San Antonio air hung heavy over Cole High School's gymnasium as 15-year-old Shaquille O'Neal walked through the doors for his first basketball practice in 1987. At 6'8" and still growing, Shaq was already an imposing figure. But it wasn't just his size that made him stand out in this small military town. He was one of only a handful of black students at the predominantly white school, and he could feel the weight of curious and sometimes hostile stares following him down the hallways. "You must be the new kid," said Coach Dave Madura, a weathered man in his 50s who had been coaching high school basketball for over 20 years. "Shaquille, right? Your stepfather told me you've got some size on you, but—" He paused, looking up at the teenager who towered over him. "I didn't expect this." "Yes, sir," Shaq replied quietly, his voice carrying the uncertainty of a young man who had learned to be cautious in new environments. This was his third high school in 4 years due to his stepfather's military assignments, and he'd learned that being the new kid, especially a black kid in predominantly white schools, came with challenges that went far beyond academics or athletics. As practice began, Shaq could feel the tension in the gym. Some of his new teammates whispered among themselves, casting glances in his direction. He'd experienced this before. The assumption that because he was black and tall, he must be naturally gifted at basketball, combined with resentment from white players who felt threatened by his presence. "Let's see what you can do, big man," called out Derek Morrison, the team's senior captain and starting center. Derek was 6'4", had been the team's star for 3 years, and clearly wasn't thrilled about the arrival of someone who might challenge his position. During scrimmage, Shaq played tentatively at first. Years of moving from school to school had taught him to read the room, to understand when his presence was welcome and when it wasn't. But as the practice progressed, his natural talent began to emerge. His size, coordination, and basketball IQ were evident to everyone in the gym. "Nice shot, boy," Derek said after Shaq scored an easy basket. The word "boy" dripping with a condescension that every black person in America recognized instantly. Shaq felt his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. His stepfather, Philip Harrison, had taught him to choose his battles carefully, especially as a young black man in environments where he was outnumbered. "Let your play do the talking," Philip had always said. "Excellence is the best response to ignorance." After practice, as Shaq gathered his things in the locker room, he overheard a conversation that would stick with him for the rest of his life. "Great. Another one of them taking spots from kids who actually belong here," muttered a player named Brad, not bothering to lower his voice much. "I heard his real dad isn't even around," added another. "Probably in jail or something. These people don't know how to be fathers." "At least he'll probably transfer again soon," Derek chimed in. "They always do." Shaq felt anger rising in his chest, but more than that, he felt hurt. These boys didn't know him, didn't know his story, didn't know that his stepfather was a respected, Army sergeant who had taught him discipline, respect, and the value of hard work. They saw his skin color and made assumptions about his character, his family, his worth as a human being. Walking home that evening, Shaq found himself questioning whether basketball was worth dealing with this kind of treatment. He'd always loved the game. But love wasn't always enough when it came packaged with hatred and prejudice. That night at dinner, Philip Harrison noticed his stepson's unusually quiet demeanor. "How was practice, son?" Shaq pushed food around his plate, debating whether to share what had happened. Finally, he looked up at the man who had become the most important father figure in his life. "Some of the guys, they said some things about black people, about our family." Philip's expression hardened, but when he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "What kind of things?" Shaq repeated the conversations he'd overheard, watching his stepfather's face for reactions. Philip listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding as if he'd heard variations of these comments before. "Son," Philip said finally, "I won't lie to you. This isn't the last time you'll face this kind of ignorance. But I want you to understand something important. Those boys don't know you, and they don't know us. Their words say nothing about who you are and everything about who they are." "But it still hurts," Shaq admitted. "Of course it hurts. Anyone who tells you racism doesn't hurt is lying. But here's what I want you to remember. You have a choice. You can let their ignorance make you angry and bitter, or you can use it as fuel to become everything they say you can't be." Philip leaned forward across the table. "Basketball isn't just a game for you, Shaquille. Whether you realize it or not, every time you step on that court, you're representing more than just yourself. You're showing people what a young black man can accomplish when he's given the chance. If you're already feeling the power of this story, please take a moment to hit that like button. What happens next will show you how sports can become a bridge across the deepest divides." The next few weeks at Cole High School were a test of everything Philip Harrison had taught Shaq about perseverance and character. The racial tensions didn't disappear overnight, but basketball practice became a laboratory where Shaq learned to transform pain into performance. Coach Madura, despite his initial uncertainty about how to handle the racial dynamics on his team, began to see something special in his newest player. During a particularly intense practice, he pulled Shaq aside. "Son, I've been coaching for 23 years, and I've seen a lot of talented players come through this gym," Coach Madura said, mopping sweat from his forehead. "But you've got something different. It's not just your size or your skills, it's your composure, the way you handle yourself when things get heated." Shaq looked confused. "What do you mean, Coach?" "I mean, I've been watching how some of these boys treat you, and I've been watching how you respond. A lot of kids would have exploded by now, would have gotten into fights, or quit the team. But you just keep working, keep improving, keep showing up." Coach Madura sat down on the bleachers, gesturing for Shaq to join him. "I grew up in a different time, Shaquille. I won't pretend I understand everything you're going through, but I know talent when I see it, and I know character when I see it. You've got both. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," Shaq admitted. "The looks in the hallways, the comments, the way some guys act like I don't belong here. You belong here because you earned your spot," Coach Madura said firmly. "Every day in practice, every improvement you make, every time you help this team get better, that's you earning your place. And anyone who can't see that is blind." The conversation was interrupted by Derek Morrison approaching them. Shaq tensed, expecting another confrontation, but Derek's demeanor seemed different. "Coach, can I talk to Shaq for a minute?" Coach Madura looked between the two players, then nodded. "I'll be in my office if you need me." For a moment, Derek and Shaq sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Derek spoke. "Look, I know I haven't exactly been welcoming since you got here." Shaq remained quiet, unsure where this conversation was heading. "The thing is," Derek continued, "I've been the star of this team for 3 years. I had college scouts looking at me, plans for a scholarship, the whole thing. Then you show up, and suddenly I'm wondering if any of that's still going to happen." "I'm not trying to take anything from you," Shaq said quietly. "I know that now," Derek replied. "I've been watching you in practice, and you're not you're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Honestly, I expected you to be arrogant, to come in here acting like you owned the place because of your size. That's what my dad always said about guys like you, guys like me, black players. He always said they were talented but undisciplined, that they didn't understand teamwork or respect." Derek looked ashamed as he spoke. "But you're not like that at all. You work harder than anyone. You listen to coach. You make everyone around you better." Shaq felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger at the stereotypes Derek had believed, but also appreciation for his honesty and apparent change of heart. "My family isn't what your dad thinks either," Shaq said carefully. "My stepfather is in the army. He taught me that respect is earned through actions, not demanded because of who you are." "Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out," Derek said. "Look, I can't promise that everyone on this team is going to change their minds about you overnight. But I can promise that if anyone gives you trouble, they'll have to go through me first." It wasn't a perfect moment. There was still awkwardness, still the weight of years of prejudice and misunderstanding. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had separated them. Over the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen. As the team prepared for their first game of the season, Shaq's work ethic and talent started to win over his teammates one by one. Players who had initially resented his presence began to appreciate how much better he made the entire team. The breakthrough came during a scrimmage against a rival school. Shaq dominated the paint, but more importantly, he created opportunities for his teammates. When Derek got into foul trouble, Shaq took over, leading the team to victory with a combination of skill and leadership that surprised everyone, including himself. In the locker room afterward, the team captain, who had barely spoken to Shaq for weeks, approached him. "That was incredible out there," said Marcus Williams, a senior guard. "The way you took over when we needed you, but still made sure everyone else got their touches. That's real leadership." "We win as a team," Shaq replied, echoing something Philip had always taught him. "Yeah," Marcus said, "but not everyone understands that. You do, though. And that's why this team is going to be special this year." As Shaq looked around the locker room, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Acceptance. Not from everyone, and not complete, but enough to know that he was becoming part of something bigger than himself. Basketball was teaching him that excellence could break down barriers, that shared goals could overcome individual prejudices, and that sports had a unique power to unite people across racial lines. But the real test was yet to come, and it would happen under the bright lights of a high school gymnasium with the entire community watching. The gymnasium at Cole High School had never seen a crowd like this. Word had spread throughout San Antonio about the new giant on the basketball team, and curiosity had packed the stands for the season opener against their biggest rival, Roosevelt High School. As Shaq walked onto the court for warm-ups, he could feel hundreds of eyes on him, some curious, some supportive, and some distinctly hostile. In the stands, the racial dynamics of the community were on full display. The crowd was predominantly white, reflecting the demographics of the military base and surrounding area, but there were pockets of Black and Hispanic families who had come specifically to see the young man they'd heard so much about. "Look at the size of that kid," Shaq heard someone say from the stands. "How old is he, really?" "Probably held back a few years," came the response. "You know how it is with these recruits." Shaq felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it was different. Instead of making him want to shrink away, the ignorant comments fueled something deeper, a determination to prove every stereotype wrong through the purity of his performance. Coach Madura gathered the team in the locker room before the game. "Gentlemen, tonight isn't just about basketball. I won't sugarcoat it. There are people in those stands who have opinions about this team, about some of you specifically, that have nothing to do with your character or your ability." He looked directly at Shaq. "The best response to ignorance is excellence. Play your game, play together, and show everyone in that gym what this team is really about." As the game began, Shaq felt every emotion he'd been carrying for weeks, channeling into his play. The opposing team had clearly scouted him, doubling and sometimes tripling him every time he touched the ball. But what they hadn't prepared for was his basketball IQ and passing ability. When three defenders collapsed on him, Shaq found Derek open for an easy score. When they overplayed the pass, he powered through contact for a thunderous dunk that brought the sympathetic parts of the crowd to their feet. Most importantly, he played with a composure and maturity that silenced even his harshest critics. By halftime, Cole High led by 18 points, and the mood in the gym had shifted. Shaq had 16 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists. But more than his statistics, his demeanor had won over many who had come expecting to see a stereotypical, undisciplined player. During halftime, as Shaq walked to the locker room, he heard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. "I'll admit it," said a voice he recognized as belonging to Mr. Peterson, one of the school board members who had been skeptical about accepting transfer students from certain backgrounds. "I was wrong about that young man. He's not just talented. He's a leader out there. Did you see how he celebrated his teammates' baskets as much as his own?" added Mrs. Johnson, a longtime supporter of the basketball program. "That's good character, regardless of where he comes from." In the locker room, Coach Madura's message was simple. "More of the same, gentlemen. You're not just winning a basketball game. You're changing minds." The second half became a showcase, not just for Shaq's individual talent, but for the chemistry he'd developed with his teammates. Derek, who had been his biggest skeptic just weeks earlier, now set crushing screens to free Shaq in the post. Marcus fed him perfect passes in traffic. The entire team played with a cohesion that reflected hours of practice and a growing mutual respect. With 5 minutes left in the game and Cole High leading by 25 points, something remarkable happened. A section of the crowd, led by some of the parents who had initially been most vocal in their criticism, began chanting, "Shaq! Shaq! Shaq!" The young man who had walked onto this court feeling like an outsider was now being embraced by a community that had learned to see past his skin color to his character and talent. After the final buzzer, as Shaq shook hands with the opposing players, Coach Madura approached him with tears in his eyes. "Son, in 24 years of coaching, I've never seen anything quite like that. You didn't just play basketball tonight, you built bridges." But the moment that would stay with Shaq forever came as he was walking off the court. Mr. Peterson, the school board member who had opposed his enrollment, approached him with his young grandson in tow. "Shaquille, I owe you an apology," Mr. Peterson said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I made assumptions about you that were unfair and wrong. Tonight, you showed me what real character looks like." He gestured to his grandson, a boy of about 8, who was looking up at Shaq with obvious admiration. "Tommy here wants to be just like you when he grows up. Not because of your size or your basketball skills, but because of the way you carry yourself, the way you treat your teammates, the way you represent your school." Shaq knelt down to the boy's level. "What's most important is that you work hard, treat people with respect, and never let anyone tell you that you can't achieve your dreams because of who you are." "Yes, sir, Mr. Shaquille," the boy replied with a wide grin. As Shaq stood back up, Mr. Peterson extended his hand. "Welcome to Cole High School, son. Really welcome." Walking out of the gym that night with his teammates, Shaq felt something he'd never experienced before. A sense of belonging that had been earned through excellence rather than given through tolerance. He had learned that sports had a unique power to strip away prejudices and reveal the human heart beneath. But more than that, he had discovered something about himself. The racism and prejudice he'd faced hadn't broken him. They had forged him into someone stronger, someone determined to succeed not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. 3 months into the season, Cole High School's basketball team had become the talk of San Antonio. They were undefeated, ranked #1 in their district, and drawing crowds that had never shown interest in high school basketball before. But for Shaq, the most meaningful changes were happening off the court. Walking through the hallways that had once felt hostile, he now experienced something entirely different. Students who had never acknowledged his presence were stopping to congratulate him on games, asking for autographs, and genuinely engaging with him as a person rather than seeing him as a stereotype. "Shaq, wait up!" called Sarah Mitchell, a sophomore who was struggling in her algebra class. "I know you're probably busy, but I heard you're really good at math. Could you maybe help me understand this stuff?" This had become a regular occurrence. Teachers had started recommending that struggling students seek help from Shaq, not just because of his academic abilities, but because of his patience and natural teaching instincts. What had started as an attempt to prove he belonged academically had evolved into genuine mentorship. "Sure, Sarah," Shaq replied, adjusting his backpack. "I've got some time before practice. Let's take a look." As they worked through algebra problems in the library, Shaq reflected on how much his life had changed. The boy who had entered Cole High School feeling like an outsider was now an integral part of the school community, sought out not just for his athletic ability, but for his character and intelligence. The transformation wasn't just personal, it was community-wide. At the local barbershop where Philip Harrison got his haircuts, conversations had shifted from skepticism about those people to pride in our young man Shaquille. At parent-teacher conferences, Shaq's name came up frequently as an example of leadership and academic excellence. But perhaps the most significant change came during a school assembly in February. Shaq had been asked to speak to the student body about perseverance and goal setting. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces that now looked back at him with respect rather than suspicion, he felt the weight of the moment. "When I first came to Cole High School," he began, his voice carrying through the gymnasium, "I'll be honest, I wasn't sure I belonged here. Some of you probably weren't sure either." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the crowd, acknowledging the truth of his statement. "But here's what I learned. Belonging isn't something that's given to you because of how you look or where you come from. Belonging is something you earn through your actions, your character, and your commitment to making the community around you better." He paused, making eye contact with students throughout the gym. Every single person in this room has faced moments when they felt like they didn't fit in. Maybe because of your race, your family's financial situation, your academic struggles, or just because you're different in some way. I want you to know that being different isn't a weakness, it's your strength." In the audience, Derek Morrison sat with his teammates, thinking about how his own perspectives had changed. The player who had once resented Shaq's presence now considered him one of his closest friends and had learned valuable lessons about judging people based on preconceptions rather than reality. "Sports taught me something important," Shaq continued. "When you're on a team, what matters isn't the color of your skin or where you came from. What matters is whether you show up, whether you work hard, whether you make the people around you better. And that's true in basketball, but it's also true in life." After the assembly, something unprecedented happened. Students began approaching Shaq not just to talk about basketball, but to share their own stories of feeling different or excluded. A Hispanic student talked about facing language barriers. A white student from a low-income family shared his embarrassment about his clothes and housing situation. An Asian student discussed feeling pressure to excel academically while struggling with social acceptance. "The thing is," Shaq told each of them, "our differences are what make us stronger as a school, as a team, as a community. When we learn from each other instead of judging each other, everybody wins." This message was put to the test during the district championship game. Cole High was facing their toughest opponent yet, a team from a predominantly black school that had dominated district play for 3 consecutive years. As the teams warmed up, Shaq found himself in an interesting position. He was now the face of a predominantly white school playing against a team that looked more like the communities where he'd spent his early childhood. During pre-game warm-ups, several players from the opposing team approached him. "Man, what are you doing over there with those white boys?" asked their star player, Marcus Thompson. "You know you don't really fit in with them." "You should transfer to our school," added another player. "Come play with your own people." Shaq felt a familiar discomfort, but this time it came from an unexpected direction. He was being criticized not for being black in a white environment, but for succeeding in that environment. "These are my teammates," Shaq replied firmly. "They're good people, and we've built something special together." "Come on, man," Marcus pressed. "You really think those white folks see you as anything more than a way to win basketball games?" For a moment, Shaq questioned everything he'd experienced over the past months. But then he thought about Derek's evolution from skeptic to friend, about Coach Madura's genuine mentorship, about the students who sought his help with schoolwork, about the community that had genuinely embraced him. "I think people are more complicated than the color of their skin," Shaq said finally. "And I think when you give people a chance to surprise you, they usually do." The game that night was more than a basketball contest. It was a statement about the power of unity over division, of shared purpose over racial suspicion. Cole High won by 12 points, but more importantly, both teams played with respect for each other. And the crowd, now fully integrated and united in their support, celebrated good basketball regardless of which team made the play. After the game, as Shaq celebrated with his teammates, he realized that basketball had taught him something that would shape the rest of his life. Excellence and character could break down any barrier, build any bridge, and transform any community willing to see past surface differences to the human heart beneath. 10 years later, Shaquille O'Neal returned to Cole High School as an NBA champion. But his visit wasn't about celebrating his professional success. He had come back to speak to a new generation of students about the lessons he'd learned as a teenager in these same hallways. The gymnasium was packed not just with current students, but with former teammates, teachers, and community members who remembered the young man who had changed their school's culture. Coach Madura, now retired, sat in the front row with tears in his eyes as he watched his former player address the crowd. "I want to tell you about the most important victory I ever won," Shaq began, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had achieved everything he'd dreamed of as a teenager. It wasn't an NBA championship, though those were pretty sweet. It wasn't an Olympic gold medal or any individual award. The most important victory I ever won happened right here in this gym, and it wasn't even a basketball game. He gestured to the banners hanging from the rafters, including one that commemorated his high school career. The victory I'm talking about was learning that sport has the power to unite people across any divide, racial, economic, cultural, whatever. When people come together around a shared goal, when they see each other's character in action, when they learn to depend on each other and celebrate each other's successes, magic happens. In the audience, Derek Morrison, now a successful engineer and youth basketball coach, nodded as he remembered his own transformation from skeptic to friend. "I won't lie to you," Shaq continued. "When I first came to this school, I faced racism. People made assumptions about me because of my skin color, my family situation, my background. Some of you in this audience might be facing similar challenges today, whether because of your race, your economic situation, your family structure, or any other factor that makes you feel different." He paused, making eye contact with students throughout the gym. "Here's what I want you to understand. Those people who judge you based on stereotypes, they're not your real opponents. Your real opponent is the voice in your own head that starts to believe what they're saying. Your real opponent is the temptation to give up, to stop trying, to accept limitations that other people want to place on you." A young black student in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. O'Neill, how did you keep going when people said mean things about you?" Shaq smiled at the question. "Great question. First, I had people in my life who reminded me of my worth. My mother, my stepfather, coaches like Coach Madura here, who saw my potential. But second, and this is really important, I learned to let excellence be my response to ignorance." "What does that mean?" the student asked. "It means that when someone says you can't succeed because of who you are, you show them they're wrong through your actions. When someone says people like you don't belong in certain spaces, you earn your place in those spaces through your character and your effort. When someone says you're not smart enough, or disciplined enough, or good enough, you prove them wrong by becoming the best version of yourself." An older white student raised his hand. "But what if you're on the other side? What if you realize you've been thinking wrong about people?" Shaq's face lit up. "That's an even better question, because it takes courage to admit when we've been wrong. I had teammates here who started out with prejudices about me, but they were willing to change their minds when they got to know me as a person. That willingness to grow, to challenge your own assumptions, to see people as individuals rather than stereotypes, that's what real strength looks like." He pointed to Derek in the audience. "Derek Morrison was my biggest skeptic when I first arrived here. He's also one of my closest friends today. Not because he pretended his initial feelings didn't exist, but because he was willing to let new experiences change his perspective." Derek stood up, and the audience applauded as he joined Shaq on the stage. "When Shaq first came to Cole High, I was threatened by him," Derek said honestly. "I'd been raised with certain ideas about black athletes, about people who were different from me. But playing alongside Shaq, seeing his work ethic, his character, his intelligence, forced me to question everything I'd been taught. And that's the power of sports," Shaq added. "On a basketball court, you can't fake character. You can't hide who you really are when the pressure is on. Your teammates see how you respond to adversity, how you treat people when things aren't going your way, how you celebrate others' successes." A Hispanic student in the middle section stood up. "What advice do you have for people who feel caught between different worlds, like not fitting in completely anywhere?" Shaq's expression grew thoughtful. I understand that feeling completely. Sometimes I felt too black for some spaces, not black enough for others, too big, too different, too much. But here's what I learned. You don't have to choose just one. Identity. You can be proud of your heritage and still build bridges to other communities. You can honor where you came from while still embracing where you're going. As the assembly wound down, Shaq shared one final message. Sports taught me that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. A basketball team needs players with different skills, different perspectives, different strengths. A community is the same way. We're better when we include everyone, when we learn from each other, when we judge people by their character rather than their appearance. After the formal presentation, Shaq spent time meeting individually with students, many of whom shared their own stories of facing prejudice or feeling like outsiders. To each one, his message was consistent. Use the challenge as fuel. Let excellence be your response, and never let anyone else's limitations become your own. Later that evening, at a small dinner with former teammates and coaches, Coach Madura raised a toast. To Shaquille O'Neal, who taught us all that breaking barriers isn't just about being talented enough to overcome them. It's about being gracious enough to hold the door open for others to follow. To all of you, Shaq replied, who taught me that changing minds isn't about winning arguments. It's about winning hearts through consistent character and genuine excellence. As he drove away from Cole High School that night, Shaq reflected on the journey that had begun with a scared teenager facing racism and hostility, and had evolved into a man who understood the power of sports to transform not just individuals, but entire communities. The lessons he'd learned on those courts about perseverance, character, excellence, and the power of bringing people together around shared goals had shaped not just his basketball career, but his entire approach to life. The boy who had once felt like he didn't belong anywhere had become a man who helped others find their place in the world, proving that sometimes the greatest victories happen not when we defeat our opponents, but when we turn them into allies. This powerful story reminds us that sports have a unique ability to break down barriers and build bridges between communities. If this story inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming adversity and building unity, and share it with someone who might need to hear that excellence and character can overcome any prejudice. Remember, we all have the power to change hearts and minds through our actions, and our refusal to let others' limitations define our potential. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and remember that every act of courage, indeed, the face of prejudice makes the world a little more just for everyone.